This is gonna be the last day y'all hear from me, bro. I'm sorry. There's just been too much going on. Police out here. Police right there. Somebody come get my son first!
Saturday morning in Brown Deer, Wisconsin. February 5th, 2022. The kind of cold, gray day where most people stay bundled inside, catching up on sleep or scrolling through their phones over coffee. But for some, weekends mean responsibility. For parents who no longer live together, Saturdays often mean the familiar routine of child exchanges, pickups and drop-offs, brief conversations about schedules, the delicate dance of co-parenting that millions of families navigate every single week. For 23-year-old Ariuna Reed, this particular Saturday was supposed to be just that, routine. Simple, unremarkable. She was driving to the Park Plaza Apartments to drop off her 2-year-old son, Egypt, with his father, a trip she'd made countless times before. The kind of errand that barely registers in your memory because it's so ordinary. What none of us could have predicted was that within the next hour, 3 people would be dead. We often ask ourselves how tragedy strikes. Do we miss the signs? Are there always red flags we should have seen? Or does violence sometimes emerge from what appears to be completely normal circumstances? The case we're about to explore with you today forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The most dangerous situations can develop from the most mundane moments. The people we think we know, the relationships that seem to be working, the arrangements that everyone agrees are healthy and functional. Eric Lewis was in his first-floor apartment that morning, probably enjoying the quiet of a weekend. He had no reason to expect that he'd soon become a key witness to one of the most shocking domestic violence incidents Wisconsin had seen in years. No reason to think that looking out his window would change everything he thought he knew about the neighbors upstairs. Other residents of Park Plaza were going about their Saturday routines, making breakfast, watching television, planning their day. None of them knew they were about to dial 911 to report shots fired. None of them expected to see their parking lot transformed into a crime scene. But that's exactly what happened. Within minutes of Ariuna's arrival, emergency dispatchers would receive frantic calls. Police officers would race to the scene, only to find themselves under fire. Neighbors would witness acts of both unimaginable violence and extraordinary courage. A situation that started as a simple parental handoff would escalate into something that would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. We want to pause here and acknowledge something important. When we examine cases like this one, we're not just looking at statistics or headlines. We're talking about real people. Ariuna Reed was a young mother with dreams, aspirations, and people who loved her deeply. She was working toward becoming a registered nurse. She had started her own business. She was building a life for herself and her son. Michael Anderson was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or perhaps, depending on how you look at it, exactly where he needed to be when someone desperately needed help. These weren't characters in a crime drama. They were human beings with families, friends, hopes, and futures that were supposed to stretch out for decades ahead of them. What makes this case particularly troubling is how it challenges our assumptions about domestic violence. We tend to think we can spot dangerous relationships. We believe there are obvious patterns, clear indicators that something is seriously wrong. We assume that families and friends can sense when someone they care about is in danger. But what happens when everyone, and we mean everyone, is completely blindsided? Ariuna's father knew Larvell Huddleston for 4 years. He described him as a perfect gentleman. They even attended Bible study together. The family felt comfortable with their co-parenting arrangement. There were no apparent disputes, no obvious conflicts, no dramatic confrontations that anyone could point to later and say, "That should have been our warning." Yet here we are, examining the aftermath of a tragedy that claimed multiple lives and left a community searching for answers that don't seem to exist. This raises questions that extend far beyond this single case. How do we protect people when danger doesn't announce itself? How do we intervene in situations that appear to be functioning normally? How do we balance respect for privacy with the need to stay alert to potential threats? And perhaps most importantly, what can we learn from cases like this that might help prevent future tragedies? These are the questions we'll be exploring together as we examine what really happened at Park Plaza Apartments that February morning. We'll meet the people involved, understand the context that led to this moment, and try to make sense of how a routine Saturday turned into a nightmare that would forever change multiple families. If you're ready to join us in seeking answers to these difficult questions, we invite you to hit that like button and subscribe to Crime Vault Stories. Together, we'll examine the evidence, hear from the witnesses, and try to understand how we can better protect the people we care about from violence that can emerge from the most unexpected places. What happened next would test everything these neighbors thought they knew about heroism, tragedy, and the thin line between ordinary life and unspeakable loss. To understand the magnitude of what was lost that Saturday morning, we need to know who Ariuna Reed really was. Born on April 8, 1998, Ariuna was the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Her family describes her smile as infectious, her laugh as unforgettable. She wasn't just another young mother trying to figure out life. She was someone with a clear vision for her future and the determination to make it happen. Ariuna lived for her son Egypt, not in the way that some parents lose themselves in their children, but in the way that showed she understood exactly what kind of mother she wanted to be. She took him to soccer practice, delighting in watching him run around the field with the boundless energy only a 2-year-old possesses. These weren't just parental obligations to her. They were the moments that made everything else worthwhile. Her aunt Carice would later say that watching Ariuna with Egypt was like seeing pure love in action. She was a devoted and wonderful mother, Carice remembered. The way Ariuna's eyes would follow Egypt around a room, making sure he was safe, engaged, happy. It was clear that this little boy was her entire world. But Ariuna was building something bigger than just the present moment. She had graduated from Bryant and Stratton College and was actively working in the medical field, with her sights set on becoming a registered nurse. This wasn't a vague someday, maybe dream. She was taking concrete steps, gaining experience, moving steadily toward a career that would allow her to help people while providing financial stability for her family. Beyond her medical aspirations, Ariuna had an entrepreneurial spirit. She was developing her own business venture, showcasing the kind of creativity and drive that suggested she was destined for success in whatever path she chose. Her family often talked about her diverse talents. She wasn't someone who limited herself to just one area of interest. The Reed family was tight-knit in the way that creates unshakable bonds. Aaron and Tracy Reed had raised their daughter to be independent, ambitious, and kind. Her siblings, Trenica and Aaron Jr., looked up to her. She was Aunt Ariuna to little Amar James, a role she embraced with the same joy she brought to mothering Egypt. Her grandparents, May Ada Harris, Roy Peterson, and Claudia Randolph, were proud of the young woman she'd become. What made Ariuna special wasn't just her accomplishments or her plans for the future. It was her character. Neighbors and friends consistently described her as someone with genuine charisma, someone who made others feel valued and heard. She was the kind of person you wanted in your corner, the kind of friend who showed up when you needed her. This is what makes understanding her relationship with Larville Huddleston so complex. To everyone who knew them, their co-parenting arrangement seemed to be working. They were no longer together romantically, but they appeared to have figured out how to put Egypt's needs first. There were no obvious conflicts, no dramatic arguments that friends or family witnessed. From the outside, it looked like they'd achieved what many separated parents struggle to accomplish: a peaceful, functional relationship focused on their child's well-being. Ariuna would drive to his apartment complex, drop Egypt off for his scheduled time with his father, and pick him up later. Simple, civilized, healthy. Her family trusted this arrangement because they trusted Larville. He wasn't a stranger who'd appeared suddenly in Ariuna's life. They'd known him for years. He'd been welcomed into their family gatherings, their conversations, their traditions. The idea that he could pose any threat to Ariuna seemed impossible to everyone who knew them both. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of domestic violence, how it can hide behind relationships that appear stable and healthy. We want to believe that we can sense danger, that we can protect the people we love by staying alert to obvious red flags. But what happens when there are no red flags visible to anyone? Ariuna was living her life, pursuing her goals, raising her son, and maintaining what seemed to be a positive relationship with Egypt's father. She had no reason to fear for her safety on that Saturday morning. Neither did anyone who loved her. The tragedy isn't just that Ariuna died. The tragedy is that a young woman with so much potential, so much love to give, so many dreams yet to fulfill, had her future stolen in a moment that no one saw coming. The most extraordinary moments in human history often emerge from the most ordinary circumstances. February 5th, 2022, would prove this truth in ways that no one at Park Plaza Apartments could have anticipated. Eric Lewis was enjoying a quiet Saturday in his first-floor apartment when the sound of gunshots shattered the morning calm. Like most people, his first instinct was probably to hope he'd heard something else. A car backfiring, construction noise, anything other than what his gut told him it actually was. But Eric Lewis made a choice that day that sets him apart from most of us. Instead of staying safely inside, instead of convincing himself he'd misheard, he moved to his window to see what was happening. What he witnessed would make him a crucial voice in understanding the events that followed. From his vantage point, Lewis could see the parking lot clearly. He could see a young woman who had been shot, wounded, vulnerable. He could see the danger that was still very real and very present. And when the immediate threat seemed to pause, Eric Lewis made another choice that speaks to his character. He ran outside to help. This brings us to Michael Anderson. Michael Anderson was 31 years old, and on that Saturday morning, he was simply going about his day in the neighborhood. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't trained in crisis intervention. He wasn't equipped with protective gear or weapons. He was just a man who saw another human being in desperate need of help. The details of what Michael witnessed are difficult to recount, but his response was immediate and unequivocal. When he saw Ariuna Reed wounded and in danger, he didn't hesitate. Along with another woman, Michael rushed toward her, attempting to get her into their car and away from harm. Think about that decision for a moment. How many of us in that same situation would have made the same choice? How many of us would have risked our own safety to help a complete stranger? How many of us would have run toward danger instead of away from it? Michael Anderson didn't have time to weigh the risks or consider the consequences. He saw someone who needed help, and he acted. It's the kind of split-second moral choice that reveals everything about a person's character. The other woman who helped, her identity wasn't widely reported, but her courage was just as remarkable. Together, these two strangers embodied something we hope exists in all of us, but rarely get tested on: the willingness to put someone else's life before our own safety. What happened next transformed their act of heroism into something far more tragic. The threat that had seemed momentarily contained suddenly escalated. Michael Anderson and his companion found themselves in immediate danger as the situation deteriorated rapidly around them. This is when we see the true cost of choosing to be a hero. Michael Anderson paid the ultimate price for his decision to help Ariuna Reed. His willingness to act, to intervene, to risk everything for someone he didn't even know, cost him his life. The parking lot that had been quiet and unremarkable just minutes earlier was now a scene of chaos. Multiple people were wounded. Emergency services were racing to respond. Neighbors were calling 911, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing. Eric Lewis, despite everything he'd already seen, made yet another courageous choice. When he saw Michael Anderson wounded, he ran to help him too. This act of compassion put Lewis directly in harm's way, and he was shot in the leg for his efforts to save another person's life. We tell you about these men not to sensationalize their actions, but to honor them. In a world where we often hear about bystanders who do nothing, who pull out phones to record instead of stepping in to help, Michael Anderson and Eric Lewis represent something different. They represent the best of what humans can be when faced with impossible situations. Their courage raises questions that extend far beyond this single incident. What creates the kind of person who runs toward danger to help others? How do we cultivate that spirit in our communities? And perhaps most importantly, when faced with a similar situation, what would we do? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're practical considerations that could determine whether someone lives or dies in a crisis. Michael Anderson's sacrifice wasn't in vain if it inspires others to act with similar courage when the moment demands it. What would you do if you witnessed someone in desperate need of help? Would you be the person who acts or the person who watches? In the midst of chaos, when police sirens were wailing and neighbors were hiding behind locked doors, Larvell Huddleston made a decision that would provide investigators with something unprecedented: a real-time confession. While barricaded in his second-floor apartment, Huddleston opened Facebook Live and began streaming. For 8 minutes, anyone with access to his social media could watch him pace back and forth, weapon in hand, in what would become his final public statement. This wasn't a panicked, incoherent rambling. This wasn't someone who'd lost complete touch with reality. What viewers witnessed was something far more disturbing: a man who seemed fully aware of what he'd done and what he was about to do next. The video captured Huddleston moving through his apartment with a strange calmness. At times, he stepped away from the camera to pray. Though the audio couldn't pick up his words, his posture and movements suggested someone seeking forgiveness. These moments of apparent spiritual reflection created a jarring contrast with the violence he'd just committed and the weapon he continued to carry. When he did speak directly to the camera, his words revealed a mind grappling with internal struggles that had clearly been building for some time. Me mentally? I've been through too much. I'm not straight. I'm not crazy, but it's a lot of stuff I can't take, he said, providing a glimpse into psychological pressure that no one around him had apparently recognized. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the video was Huddleston's attempt to control how his actions would be remembered. In his final statement to the camera, he said, "People going to think this over a woman. It's not." This wasn't someone who had lost the ability to think strategically about his public image. This was someone who wanted to shape the narrative even in his final moments. The disconnect between his words and his actions created a deeply unsettling viewing experience for anyone who watched the stream. Here was a man who could acknowledge his mental health struggles, who could pray for forgiveness, who could express concern about how others would interpret his behavior, yet who had just committed acts of extreme violence and showed no indication of surrendering to police. Throughout the 8 minutes, viewers could hear police activity outside the apartment. The sound of officers taking positions, the tension of a standoff in progress, the knowledge that this situation could escalate further at any moment. Huddleston seemed aware of their presence, but made no moves toward cooperation or de-escalation. The live stream also captured his requests for the safe retrieval of Egypt, his 2-year-old son who was inside the apartment with him. This showed that even in his disturbed state, Huddleston retained enough awareness to understand that his child was innocent and shouldn't suffer consequences for his father's actions. What makes this digital record so powerful is how it challenges our typical understanding of violent crimes. We often imagine perpetrators as either completely rational conspirators or completely irrational individuals who've lost touch with reality. Huddleston's video shows us something more complex. Someone who retains significant cognitive function and self-awareness while simultaneously committing and planning further acts of violence. The video ended abruptly, leaving viewers to wonder what would happen next. Those 8 minutes provided law enforcement with crucial intelligence about Huddleston's mental state and intentions, but they also created a permanent record of a man's final moments that his family, friends, and community would have to live with forever. This digital confession raises profound questions about the intersection of technology and crime. Social media platforms have become unwitting documentarians of some of our darkest moments as a society. They preserve evidence that might otherwise be lost, but they also create traumatic content that can be viewed and reviewed indefinitely. The fact that Huddleston chose to broadcast these moments suggests someone who wanted his story told on his own terms, even as that story was reaching its tragic conclusion. It was an attempt at maintaining agency in a situation where he'd already surrendered any moral authority. Within approximately 45 minutes of the initial violence, Eric Lewis heard one final shot from the apartment above him. When the gunfire finally stopped and the immediate threat ended, investigators faced a crime scene that would be relatively straightforward to reconstruct, but impossible to fully comprehend. The physical evidence told a clear story. The medical examiner would rule Ariuna Reed's and Michael Anderson's deaths as homicides. Larvell Huddleston's death was classified as suicide by self-inflicted gunshot wound. 3 lives lost in less than an hour, with the perpetrator's own live stream serving as a confession that eliminated any question about what had occurred. But while the investigation could quickly establish the facts of the case, it couldn't address the most heartbreaking element of the entire tragedy. Egypt Reed Huddleston was inside his father's apartment when Huddleston took his own life. Let that reality settle for a moment. A 2-year-old child who had just been dropped off for what should have been a normal visit with his father instead became a witness to events that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his entire life. Egypt didn't just lose his mother that day. He lost her in the most traumatic circumstances imaginable, and he was present for his father's final act as well. Child psychologists tell us that trauma experienced at such a young age can have profound and lasting effects on development. Even if Egypt doesn't retain conscious memories of that Saturday, his developing brain was processing sounds, emotions, and chaos that no child should ever experience. The impact of this exposure will likely require years of specialized care and support. Egypt represents something that often gets overlooked in discussions of domestic violence: the ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate victims. He survived the physical violence, but he'll be living with its psychological consequences for the rest of his life. He'll grow up knowing not just that he lost both parents on the same day, but how he lost them. The Brown Deer community recognized this immediately. Within days of the tragedy, Ariuna's parents, Tracy and Aaron Reed, established a GoFundMe campaign to support Egypt's future. The response was overwhelming. More than $20,000 was raised to help cover funeral expenses and provide for the little boy's ongoing care and education. This financial support represents something deeper than just charitable giving. It reflects a community's recognition that Egypt's well-being is now their collective responsibility. His extended family stepped forward immediately, but the broader community understood that raising a child who's experienced such trauma requires resources and support that go far beyond what any single family can provide. Carmen Pedre, president and CEO of the Sojourner Family Peace Center, used this tragedy as an opportunity to educate the public about domestic violence patterns. She emphasized that the COVID-19 pandemic had created conditions that made such violence more likely and harder to detect. Increased isolation meant fewer opportunities for friends and family to observe concerning behaviors or for victims to seek help safely. Peter's insights force us to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence prevention. The traditional advice about recognizing red flags becomes meaningless when there are no visible red flags to recognize. The emphasis on victims seeking help becomes irrelevant when the violence escalates faster than anyone can respond. This case demonstrates what experts call the lethality factor in domestic violence situations involving firearms. Research shows that the presence of guns in domestic violence situations increases the risk of homicide by 500%. When someone with access to weapons reaches a crisis point, the window for intervention can close in minutes rather than days or weeks. The community response to Egypt's situation also highlights an important aspect of healing from collective trauma. Rather than simply processing their grief privately, Brown Deer residents channeled their emotions into constructive action. They refused to let this tragedy define their community negatively. Instead, they chose to let it define them as people who protect and support the most vulnerable among them. Egypt will grow up knowing that his community rallied around him when he needed them most. While nothing can replace what he lost or undo what he experienced, he'll have the foundation of knowing that he's valued, supported, and loved by people who were determined to honor his mother's memory through their care for him. On February 9, 2022, 4 days after the tragedy, loved ones gathered in the shadows of Milwaukee's Marshall High School for a candlelight vigil. They came not just to mourn, but to ensure that Ariuna Reed would be remembered for who she was, not just how she died. The vigil attendees shared stories about Ariuna's infectious laugh, her determination to build a better life for herself and Egypt, her dreams of helping others through nursing. They talked about her entrepreneurial spirit, her creativity, her unwavering optimism about the future. These memories painted a picture of someone whose life had meaning far beyond the violent way it ended. But the gathering served another purpose. It became a platform for addressing the larger issues that Ariuna's death had exposed. Speaker after speaker emphasized the need for better education about domestic violence, improved access to mental health resources, and stronger community networks that could identify and address problems before they reached crisis points. What emerged from these conversations was a recognition that traditional approaches to domestic violence prevention had failed in this case. There had been no obvious red flags, no history of reported incidents, no pattern of escalating abuse that anyone could point to. This forced the community to grapple with a difficult truth. Sometimes the most dangerous situations develop behind facades of complete normalcy. The case has become a catalyst for expanding how we think about intervention and prevention. Rather than focusing solely on identifying obvious signs of abuse, advocates now emphasize the importance of creating environments where people feel safe discussing mental health struggles before they become crises. Ariuna's story has been incorporated into training programs for law enforcement, social workers, and healthcare providers. Her case illustrates why professionals need to ask deeper questions and look beyond surface appearances when evaluating relationships and family dynamics. Educational initiatives have sprung up in her memory, focusing on teaching young people about healthy relationship dynamics and emotional regulation. These programs recognize that prevention work must start long before people enter potentially dangerous situations. The medical field that Ariuna had planned to join has taken special note of her case. Nursing programs now include enhanced training on recognizing subtle signs of domestic violence and mental health crises. Students learn that healthcare providers are often the last point of contact for people in dangerous situations, making their observational skills critically important. Egypt's future has become a symbol of resilience and hope for the entire community. While we cannot know what his mother would have accomplished had she lived, we can ensure that her values of education, compassion, and service continue through the support provided to him. Scholarship funds established in Ariuna's name will help other young people pursue careers in healthcare, multiplying the positive impact she would have made. The case has also influenced policy discussions about firearm access during domestic disputes. Advocates point to Ariuna's story when arguing for stronger temporary removal procedures and enhanced background check systems that might prevent weapons from being available during relationship crises. Perhaps most importantly, Ariuna's death has sparked conversations about the isolation that can make dangerous situations worse. Community organizations have developed new outreach programs designed to maintain connections with families going through transitions like separation or divorce, ensuring that people don't face their challenges completely alone. Her memory challenges all of us to be more attentive to the people in our lives, to ask harder questions, and to create spaces where struggling individuals feel comfortable seeking help before their problems become emergencies. We cannot predict every tragedy, but we can build stronger safety nets for when people need them most. Ariuna Reed deserved to see her son grow up, to achieve her dreams of becoming a nurse, to contribute her talents and energy to making the world better. Since we cannot give her that future, we honor her by working to ensure that other families don't face similar losses. The work continues in her name, driven by the belief that her life mattered, and that her death can serve as a catalyst for meaningful change. If cases like Ariuna's compel you to stay informed about domestic violence prevention and community safety, we invite you to subscribe to Crime Vault Stories. Together, we can shed light on the cases that demand justice and the lessons that might save lives.